All right, everybody, welcome back to our Fireside Chat series as part of the Filecoin Frontier Accelerator. Today, we're so excited to host Bjorn Wagner from Parity, is of course behind Polkadot. And the topic today we want to talk about is the foundations of Web 3.0. Now, many of us, the projects we're building can be along the various spectrums of Web 3.0. Is it like centralized or decentralized? Is it plugged into DeFi, or is it like running on some certain hardware? But are you actually part of Web 3.0? What does it actually mean? And how can you tap into the power? So let's discuss some of these topics, and then please think of your questions because we will have a chance to speak to Bjorn directly. All right. So Bjorn, shall we start with some quick intro, whatever you want to share about yourself and your journey so far in Web3?
Sure. I'm gonna make it really quick. My name is Bjorn. Right. Wonderful to have you on the call and whoever may see the video in the future. Right. So a bit about my journey. I entered the market, the blockchain space full time around 2014 when I focused. When I was still in academia and focused my research work on decentralized web blockchain related topics, and then went down the rabbit hole from there. A couple of years fast forward, I teamed up with Gavin Wood, who had just left the Ethereum Foundation at that point after launching the Ethereum network, after publishing the white paper, building the first client, and then launching the network in, I think that was around 2015, early 2016, to start a private company. Back then it was called ETHCore, and the name was later changed to Parity Technologies, and became one of the first employees then to a co-founder role, and have since served in the role of the chief commercial officer, mostly overlooking all the ecosystem development, right, for the various networks we've been involved in, as well as our products, and being over time quite involved in building the product strategy and the products themselves. And like for those of you that may not be as familiar with Parity, right, our company, we are now, I think, of a size of like 150 people roughly, of which the majority are still researchers, Rust experts, distributed system experts, very, very talented programmers, a couple of researchers, and then a team of those that try to have certain blockchain ecosystem flourish and support. And I think like how we've evolved over time, we've come from a place where we have focused mainly on Ethereum, starting off with the Rust implementation of the Ethereum client, which was called Parity back then, and then from there graduating towards building Rust implementation for some other blockchain networks such as Bitcoin, Zcash, and then eventually setting off to try to improve how this core infrastructure blockchain networks in themselves work and what they provide to those that seek to innovate on top of them, which led us to build and like research, build, design, and build Polkadot, as well as Substrate, this blockchain building framework. And fast forward today, we've been helping the Web3 Foundation and others to launch Kusama, as well as Polkadot, the networks, as well as push out quite a few innovations, as well as toolings on top that makes these blockchain systems and platforms more usable over time. And yeah, that's it about our technology. And I guess that summarizes it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bjorn. I know there's so much to talk about, so it's very hard to compress all of that. But today, coming to the topic of today, Web3, which was kind of, I guess, coined by Gavin in a way in the current definition that we understand it in the blockchain space. And of course, you were right there when it happened as well. So what is it bears kind of reminding all of us, what is then the definition of Web3, right? Because, there are many definitions from like the semantic web, like Internet of Everything, and, people just get confused. So how would you explain it?
Interesting. I think generally, definitions are only that interesting, right? And it's often more interesting to in the context of like, what does it mean for you, or in what context you see the relevance of it. Now, if I was pressed to give a definition, it would be something along the lines of Web3 is something like an extensible framework for creating some massively multi-user, economically strong applications. Now, that's extremely wordy, right? And I think just generally, to think it's more meaningful to talk first about a bit like why does it matter, and what context should the significance of like Web3 be seen. And like when you talk about that, right, like I think like generally Web3 is probably many of you share this opinion, is kind of supposed to be what the original internet was supposed to look like, to follow a certain design primitives, to follow certain ideas that were that the people had in mind when they set out to build the internet in the first place. Now, when we look at where we see ourselves today, right, Web2, today's web, how it's designed, how it allows you to architect applications, you would see that it really is designed around like certain existing notions of trust, right? And this trust, you can see like, well, we have to trust the company apps, right? We have to trust bank servers with more data than ever before than we have. And in using all these applications, right, we're giving away more of our data, information, and preferences than we have ever before in time, right? And what we've seen over particularly the last, I think, 10 years is that these companies and basically authorities or powers that we are entrusting with our preferences and data have been abusing that information, right? And you have been seeing some very straightforward examples of, the PRISM revelations, Snowden revelations, right, around governance illegally spying on us, right, going beyond their mandate, going beyond laws and spying on us, or covertly working together with the large tech companies to insert weaknesses into our products, right, or the encryption weaknesses that we've heard about, to, just corporates not treating the data that is particularly sensitive in a way that it should be treated, right? Like examples are you might remember the Equifax hack, right? Where I think something like 150 million Americans social security numbers were exposed, right? And identity theft is a real problem, right? So, and overall, you just see that, power in today's world is more concentrated than ever before, I believe. I think it's no surprise that like the fangs of the world, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and so forth are called out as digital overlords by now. Just as, as software is eating the world and the internet is eating the world, digitization is, going into the last corners of the world. There's more and more power accumulated in those people that operate these platforms that allow us to interact and communicate. And generally, these platforms are very opaque, right? And whenever you have opaqueness, that means you have very little accountability. And I believe, like we have seen that, the government and regulators don't catch up with it, or don't want to catch up with ensuring that there's a level playing field, right? That the internet and this very important infrastructure that lets us, cooperate and interact and communicate in the way we want, to keep that equal, right? Equal playing field. And I think that's really the problem we have, and that we seek with the Web3 approach, seek to better. And in some way, like for me, Web3 isn't so much about how it looks and feels, but to what kind of power it exerts us, right? Exposes us to what precarious situation it exposes us. I don't actually think like, the UIs should or need to look in any way different. The UX should be that different, right? And to some extent, maybe, the Web2 giants have served us as a proof of concept how these services that we use today, right, can and should work, right? But I think the Web3 will be really helping us putting these proof of concepts or these services into production, in a sense, bringing them back to the original internet ideals of having a level playing field and having basically this infrastructure more for the people rather than for the powerful.
So we're really here it's really about power and control and the level playing field, right? So it's pretty much like quite a philosophical kind of like driven way to build internet, or more kind of like human-centric, user-centric internet, as you mentioned. And I think of course a lot of us indeed would love to see this happen and move towards this vision. And we need to look to some maybe early examples of like how do we know we're heading in the right direction, right? Given Parity Polkadot has plenty of progress already. Are there some examples that you like to highlight that already addresses this kind of like power dynamic shift or control level playing field that you're talking about?
Well, yeah, I think like taking a step back, one interesting development we see is, for example, what happened recently around GameStop, right, in the financial markets, right, where you could make the case that you had this example where certain people, right, like these general people were exerted certain powers, right, that literally cut them out, right? They were shut down because of moneyed interest, potentially making a phone call, right? And I think that's a great example of showing that there is a real hunger for change in that regard, right? People are ready for something to change. People are very aware of what it means to be exposed to an unlevel playing field, right? Similar things you've been seeing about the outcries of the deplatforming that has been happening on Twitter, right, repeatedly around, where many folks, rightfully so, in my opinion, right, are more and more speaking up against not being given their right to speak up, right, and being exposed, right, to these forces. Now, when it goes to like, hey, where do we see some examples, right, of Web3 potentially making a difference today already, right? If I take a bit of a step back of these like extreme cases where it's mostly about censorship, right? Censorship or being shut out, and look into the direction of underserved populations, right? I think that the two big user groups or like beneficiaries that we would see are either those that are being cut out of certain services and powers and so forth, right? And on the other hand, those that are underserved to some extent, where our current system, the incentives in our current systems don't allow for certain people to be served with certain services, for example, financial services, right? Like you can always make this case where, if you're in Africa, for example, right, it doesn't make sense for US bank to serve those folks that have a potentially revenue of $100 a month, right? Because like building this infrastructure is just too costly, right? Just doesn't make sense economically. And so it's in large parts often not happening, or it's taking way too long to give those folks the same opportunities that we have in other parts of the world. And one example where I think the technology has made a difference is one project that we've been working on for the last few years. An example where we've been working with the United Nations World Food Program. I think the project started even in 2016 or 17, if I'm not mistaken. Basically, the United Nations World Food Program mission is to feed the hungry, right? And in the past, they've done that with, they had certain people were in starvation. They would identify where they are. They would ship loads of food, right, to that place and deliver to them. But as it turns out, those means are a lot more ineffective than if you do cash deliveries. If in those regions where these people in needs are, if there is an existing infrastructure of, for example, retailers, stores, where people could buy groceries. Now, the issue is that the challenge that they've always been facing is that in those countries where this need existed, the financial infrastructure isn't as robust in the Western world, and often, if the World Food Programme then says like, hey, let's partner up with a couple of local banks that then again partner up with retail stores to somehow deliver to people in need food. What turned out is that most of the money would just, disappear in sinkholes, or be exposed to very high transaction fees. So one example of what we did is we partnered up with the World Food Programme and built a system where the United Nations World Food Programme served a refugee camp in Jordan for Syrian refugees. A couple of 100,000 are being served every month today, where these refugees were identified on a ledger. They could go in to your grocery store, could identify themselves with either a phone or iris scanner, have a blockchain identity, and then had a certain allowance on the ledger. And the retailer could basically access that allowance, and the refugee would countersign a transaction, thereby access this allowance and like purchase produce or products that they needed to live. And the World Food Programme then in the back end would settle this transaction directly with this retailer, cutting out all the intermediaries in the middle, right? All the banks and so forth. And thereby, I think they were able to eliminate 98% of all fees, and potentially more importantly, close all these sinkholes, which usually money would just disappear into. And I think that's an example of this technology actually making a real difference. It's currently extended to other parts of the world, Bangladesh, other refugee camps, and hopefully in the near future will serve a couple million people monthly. I think that's just a good example of how that can make a difference. The other example that's always straightforward is remittances that have been historically also an industry, I think, where there have been powers that could, charge fees as exorbitant as 30%. That's another example where I think this digital, the Web3 movement has been able to make a real difference. Another example is a Filecoin run, which I love, right? Like an IPFS one, of like protecting climate data from in the US from potential actions on the government side to remove or basically dehost this potentially very valuable climate data.
Yeah, these are super inspiring examples, and I see a common thread of, like you said, the disintermediation, but it's really about removing the rent-seeking layer and giving that kind of direct control interaction to the users, to the people who actually provide and receive value. And I think that is indeed like the heart of the movement. Now, for these programs, some of it is very, very obvious, like the World Food Programme, there's huge social impact, right? For many of our founders here, they may be building various things, right? So maybe it's a game, or maybe it's like a social media thing, or it could be like online learning and so on. They may not have as direct kind of a social impact, but we also want to tap into this kind of macro global trend towards Web 3.0. So how should founders think about am I Web 3.0? How do I become more, user-centric, giving control back to the users? So what are some practical steps that founders keep in mind that oh yes, if I do this, this is Web 3. If I do this, this is not. Maybe it's not so simple, but along the right direction.
Yeah, I don't know if that exists, practical steps, or if there's an assessment framework by which you can determine are you Web 3 or not. I think for me personally, it's mostly about certain ideals or ideas behind how we are trying to create a more equitable internet, right? A more equitable infrastructure to go about our business how we want to. And some of these ideas, I think, that have proven to be very powerful and useful is open by design. And open by design, right? Creating your application or your system in a way that it's open by design means multiple things from it. Number one, transparency, right? Like having a system that's auditable by external parties, by third parties, without a gatekeeper. Having a system, right, that has open APIs, right? That fuels open innovation in a regard where other people can look at it and be very creative in thinking about how they can build something that adds utility to the overall system in a way. And I think that's like a very fundamental building block of Web3 as well as like blockchains in general, right? You think like, hey, you have open APIs, you have an open design, open documentation, right? That's super powerful. Another one is, well, give back the power to the user, right? Particularly over critical things such as their identity and their data, which could be used interchangeably. I guess like your data to some extent determines your identity in the internet, right? Last but not least, I think one of these ideas that I think I stand behind or I see in Web3 is also the idea that things should consider user privacy in a way where users shouldn't have to reveal more information than necessary to do what they seek to do, right? Yeah, I think these are some of the things that for me determine like does somebody align with Web3? Are they part of that movement? Is the way they think and what they build interesting to other people in that space.
Yeah. I love that all these three are applicable with or without blockchain, actually, right? Because you could build on whatever platforms, whatever technologies, as long as it's open, as long as you're giving like the critical control back to the user, as long as you're keeping it private, like this is applicable. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Bjorn. Now, we have, I think we're going to save about this half hour or so now to engage with some of the founders directly. And in fact, I think quite a few of our founders here are very much in line with what you're talking about. I'd like to first call on, I think, Franklin as the most obvious one, given, it's about returning medical data control back to the users. Franklin, would you like to come on and introduce yourself and ask any questions?
Can I speak Chinese?
Oh, okay. Yes, I will help translate. Sorry, it'll take a bit of time. Bjorn, yeah.
对于前面说的那个就是 Web3的Web3的这个精神，我是非常的赞同。因为现在医疗行业，说一个数字吧，大概就是我们在这个美国大概84%的大概有83%的美国人，那么有个统计数据就是到死都没有看到他自己的病历长得什么样子，就是现在所有的数据都在机构里面。
Yeah, so he feels that he's really aligned with the Web3 vision because, well, they're working on medical data and giving it to the users. And the stats is that in the US, apparently, more than 83% of the data or users are never seen by the users themselves and only kept in the institutions.
所以说，数据的这个民主化的运动，把这个数据的控制权交给个人，在医疗行业显得尤为的迫切。
Yeah, that's why giving the control and access of this data back to the users is such a critical component.
而且现在在这个一个细分的领域，比如说是精神领域，就是那种精神类疾病的这种 PP 的这种细分领域，大概统计就是有24%的人不太愿意把他的个人信息放在这个 Internet 传统的 Internet 上面，那么这样就让医生很难去帮助患者去康复，这就是一个隐私的问题。
Yeah, and especially recently with the rise of mental health issues, apparently more than 24% of users actually are not willing to even share this data with institutions, and this is preventing them from being able to access the healthcare because of this privacy issue that Web3 has.
现在的环境就是很多患者并不知道自己在 Web3 里面能够得到什么东西，所以说我的想法是不是说在应用程序的细节层面需要告诉他哪些信息是开放的，哪些信息是属于自己的，是通过私钥加密的。那么我们在一些细节地方就要标识出来，让他能够过渡到这个真正的这个属于自己的数据掌控的世界里面。
All right, so we come to the question now. So, given the benefits of Web3 are very clear, and like we are going to give it to the users, but often the users don't know, right? Because they're so used to using these Web2 platforms where all the data is given away. So the plan is to perhaps have some sort of somehow inform the user as they're using the platform that, hey, you have privacy here, you have control of your data here. But how do you kind of communicate this effectively while they're using the product to still have the best experience, Bjorn?
I think that's a very interesting, very important question. It goes a bit into like how do we differentiate all ourselves and our products from what we see in the rest of the world right now? Just very practically, I think there are certain design approaches you can take to that, like actual visual design approaches, right? Where you make the user very clear that from a certain point on, everything he inserts is being treated in a certain way, and like have something like certain visual clues that remind them continuously about it, right? Like in some way, like I'm not a designer by background, but I've seen some cases, examples where that has worked in the past. Just generally, I think what might be very helpful for the space in general is to come to a certain, to team up in a way, and potentially come to a minimum set of attributes that an application or should have, or like how data should be treated, and then have something recognizable, some visual avatar, something recognizable that we can all reuse to team up to tell the world, hey, that's really the difference, right? Because like the real challenge is today nobody reads terms and conditions, right? I think a lot of people by now are luckily enough are aware of the issues that the way data is treated today cause, right? But it will still take quite a bit of time, I think, until we get to a point where people would users would proactively look into, is this application, does it treat my information better than others, right? I think one thing that has worked very well, for example, is if you look into Android and iOS, right? They basically, when you download an app and install an app, they ask you for permissions for all these things, right? Now, you might have seen that Signal, particular advocates, have come out and just basically showed comparison between those three, right? Between WhatsApp, Telegram, and Signal. These are the permissions each of them needs, right? And then created that into like an educational piece to say like, hey, you want to communicate. Do you actually need to give that up? Probably not, because this application does it different. But like potentially, if you have an app where you have like an other example, like somebody else offering a similar service or product than you, that treats the user data in an egregious or like badly way, right? That you completely disagree with, use that to show the difference, right? Basically show this is how they treat your data and this is how you treat your data. And then kind of hope and use like maybe advocacy group to bring the word forward, or to, I don't want to say certificate you, but like help them take their voice and support you in some way or another. But it's a really difficult problem.
All right. Thank you so much, Bjorn. I think that's super clear, the comparison, and hopefully we come up with some sort of icon that represents, Web3 that you can just put on any product and people know, like, okay, this one is good. Yeah. Franklin, all good? All right. You're on mute, by the way. Yeah. All right, Franklin, thanks for your question.
Thanks.
All right. A few other teams here that are waiting to ask their questions. I'm going to invite, well, first who joined the room, Chase and Paul, OP Games, to come.
Yeah, sure.
Join us. We know, gaming, of course, just like at many social things, are engineered to influence behavior and such. May not. How do you fit into Web3? Let's talk about it. Arthur, your own question.
Well, actually, Bjorn, thanks for the insights. Like, it's been a short, 35 minutes for now, but there's a lot of things that's really interesting about what you mentioned a while ago, particularly open by design. That's actually one of those things that Paul and I are trying to do with what OP Games is all about. So in a nutshell, I guess I have a couple of questions, and I guess quite curious about your thoughts on a few things. A while ago, you did mention something about UI and UX and how likely it is different on the Web 2 perspective and on the Web 3 perspective. One of the things we struggle a lot over the last couple of years building OP Games was that we are sort of like trying to abstract everything away from our users, because we came from a gaming background, mobile gaming background. And a lot of times, the user experience for, games, from transactions to purchasing and stuff like that, is super clean right now in terms of 2 clicks of a button and you have your in-app purchase. With Web3 coming into play and crypto being part of that whole equation as well, would you think that it's good to continuously mimic and model what the Web 2 has done so far in engaging their users? Or do you think that it's time to sort of introduce this sort of unfamiliar ways of how people do things, particularly with wallets and stuff like that, that could potentially somewhat become a bit of a barrier to a smoother user experience, at least for those people who doesn't know about Web3 at the moment?
Yeah, a good question. So generally, I don't think so. The thing that we got to get away from is believing that users will just change their preference just because of our ideals behind Web3. It's still a couple of percent people in the world, maybe 5, maybe 10 that really care about it to an extent that they would choose not to engage in services or products that they otherwise really would like to, right? So I think if you want to build a successful application, think today, right, that doesn't necessarily target this very niche group of idealists or people that value those Web3 ideas extremely highly, then you gotta cater to the users' preferences that they have today. And I would, so the way I would probably approach that is, if somebody wants to play a game and you want to create, you're looking to create the same game as in the same Web 2 game, but you end up figuring out hey, with today's Web3 infrastructure, you just can't create a competing user experience, right? Either because time to finality of transactions is too short, right? Too long, right? The delay is too long, or the onboarding process is really crap, right? I would either try to rethink your audience group, right? Like narrow it down to those people that actually care about these sorts of things, or try to create something vastly different, like a vastly different game, right? Something that just doesn't exist in the Web 2 world, right? Because like if you try to do the same just with Web 3, and then it turns out to be shittier for 99% of what the users care about that use this app, you are just going to lose, right? And that's a bit of the tricky situation we all found ourselves into, right? Like, but I believe eventually, right? Like, I don't think users or these people, our people in the world, will just drastically change their preferences just because we come around with Web3, right? There will still be people that want to play games like we have today, or do all sorts of things. So I think, eventually we will have to get to a point where Web3 infrastructure catches up with Web2 infrastructure, where we create a user experience even for the same games that users want to use today, right? But for today, like for today, you and other people building games or infrastructure for games, well, that doesn't help you much, right? If the Web3 infrastructure just isn't on par today. So in those cases, I would either target, like, really craft products and services that target these rather niche audience still, right? Of people that care about it, or focus on creating, just vastly different opportunities. And I think, like, in gaming, even you have seen that in gaming, right? Where with combining gaming with DeFi to some extent, create new opportunities that you haven't had before to some extent, and potentially more open worlds, right, that you haven't had before, and may marry different different spaces and like opportunities, as you've seen with, like, the DeFi aspect of NFTs, the gaming platform Upwork from an open innovation perspective of, like, creating potentially more equitable terms of, like, developers engaging and creating games on top of a platform, or on the other hand, delivering those VR world creators a way to monetize the assets they build, and basically supercharging innovation by having them all interact and collaborate without you being the party that the bottleneck as the platform operator that facilitates all that, right? I think there are opportunities to piggyback on the novel characteristics of Web3 to creating new stuff. But I agree with you, if you just pick like any Web2 game that you have today and just say, like, oh, this is great, let's build it for Web3. But the way Web3 is designed today and the infrastructure you have at your disposal today doesn't give you any benefit, and just basically says, like, oh, I give back the user data, I don't think that's going to fly.
Sounds good. Thanks for the insight. I really appreciate that. A lot of those things that you mentioned are actually things that Paul and I have been discussing now for a while, and has been key to really how we are shaping the platform, the gaming platform that we're building. So thanks, appreciate that.
All right. Thanks, Jason Paul, for your question. Okay. I see another team here. I see two more teams actually. So Henry and Junyao Mitchell. Maybe let me call upon the guys from Non-Entropy Tech, Junyao and Mitchell. I know you're working on your education tech, which can be very relatable to Web3 as well. So Junyao and Mitchell, would you like to come on?
Sure. So we are working on a application that kind of Coursera on decentralized storage. So we are trying to offer open courses based on the Filecoin storage, so that we can have secure storage, and the course owners can have full control of their courses. And the question we have about Web3 is that, so people are saying that the Web3 will be like a semantic web, where the internet and the computer can really understand what is being transferred or being stored on the internet. So how Do you think that will be the case, and how different technology, what kind of technologies, and how will they contribute to real this semantic web?
Yeah, great question. It's always interesting, the semantic web, when it comes up, because that was the Web3 before the kind of we cooks came in and said like, oh, no, actually that's Web3, right? So the semantic web is the original Web3, right? But well, I mean, I don't know. To be very frank, I don't know what's going to come, what's going to happen. You know, I think the ideas behind the semantic webs are very powerful one. You know, if we had it in place, it would be extremely useful in the context of Web3, of what we're doing. It would be extremely useful of the you know, ongoing trend towards automation. But you know, I think, you know, the work also that, for example, Protocol Labs has been doing to, you know, go a bit more, steer that our space a bit in this direction has been great. I think the semantic web is still a very, 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 very long way to go. And, you know, I'm not too familiar with why the previous attempts, right? There was in the, I think in the 2000s, early 2000s and so forth, there was a big movement towards like driving the internet more and creating standards for that, have never caught on. It seems to be a very, very hard problem. I would love, what insights do you have on that end? I'd love to learn more.
Yeah, Junya, you are on mute, by the way. Oops, I think he may be a little bit. Oh, yeah, you're back. Hello, Junya? Yes, you are on mute. We want to talk about the semantic web from your perspective.
So from my point of view, in order to have semantic web, so far how the data is organized in Web3 may not be a very good way for computers to really understand the data. However, for like in IPFS or Filecoin, so everything is like content addressable. So we believe that in some content, this will help computer to better understand what the data means. Because if we have content addressable data, it's every piece of data is not isolated anymore. They are interconnected. For example, for this piece of data, they can appear in this bunch of data and can also appear in another bunch of data. So in that way, the computer or the network can naturally connect these two pieces of data. However, in Web3, even though these two pieces of data may have the same content, but they have different address. So for computers, they do not know whether these two data are exactly the same pieces. Thus, they may not be able to understand the link between these two bunches of data.
Yeah, I think that depends on the blockchain system. I mean, you know, you can, for example, in the Polkadot context, right, you can design your runtime in a way where the same, you know, the piece of data is addressed by its fingerprint, right? So you would at least have this connection. But you know, the question remains, like, beyond that is, what do you do with metadata? How do you link metadata to it? How do you? I think that's part of, you know, that's part of the semantic web as well, right? Like being able to, for machines being able to interpret that data in one way or another, right? And that's, I absolutely agree with you. There's still like loads of work to be done in general. But but not just in blockchain, with the internet in general. And it seems to be the idea is really simple behind the semantic web generally, but it seems to not be particularly feasible for this, for in this rather uncoordinated space of the internet to come to new standards to make something like the semantic web happen. I'd love to see it. I'm a bit, not particularly optimistic that we will see anything in this regard soon.
Thank you, Melvin.
Thank you, Bjorn, and thank you, Jinyao. All right. So stark reflection on semantic web, and we have our final team here with us, Henry, who is working on an identity project, of course, a very core part of Web3. So Henry, would you like to come on? Hello, Henry. Pinging Henry. Henry, are you here? Okay. Well, if we're waiting for them a little bit. Am I lagging now? Yes.
No,
sorry. You said something?
She can. One thing I can do in the meantime, because I think I didn't give you an intro to like Polkadot actually. Right? What that is. So, and it might be relevant for some of you here. So, I suppose you're familiar with blockchains in general. Those folks on the call, I consider you guys familiar. That's what I consider for now. Now, generally it's like I always try to find new ways to describe Polkadot that might work better. So in general, in the blockchain space, right? I think one thing that has been established is the concept of like, hey, there are layer 1 protocols, right? Those blockchains that provide a certain state machine and provide security on them, has validation and so forth. And this layer 1 protocol can be blockchains such as Bitcoin, right, who has like a certain consensus mechanism, and has a state machine that does certain things, right? In the case of Bitcoin, you have a UTXO based model that's basically relatively a simple accounting system or calculator that lets you send tokens from one key to another. In Ethereum, it's a bit more complicated and a bit more extensible, where you have a state machine that exposes actually a smart contract platform on which users can deploy code that other people can execute. And now Polkadot abstracts, abstracts a level up, so to say, right? So when you think about layer 1 is something like Ethereum, Bitcoin. Layer 2 are protocols that build on top of these state machines. And for example, you use something like optimistic rollups, right? Zero knowledge rollups, Lightning Network, and so forth, right? What Polkadot is essentially, from my point of view, the first kind of like layer 0 protocol in the blockchain stacks, because it does provide security and connectivity for what could be seen as layer 1 protocols. And in the context of Polkadot, we call these layer 1 protocols that are all connected and secured by the overarching network called Polkadot. We call them parachains, because they are chains that run in parallel at the same time, can collate transaction and like do you go about their thing in parallel, while being all secured by this overarching network and being connected and allowed to talk with each other by the Polkadot network. And again, these parachains can be all sorts of different chains. They can look more like Bitcoin, like a UTXO chain that does one specific thing. They can also be smart contract chains, right? Currently, I know a couple of teams that are building smart contract chains on Polkadot, like you have some Edgeware that builds on a WebAssembly-based smart contract module, right? That's in the runtime that allows like building contracts in a number of different languages, such as Rust, Assembly, Script, as well as Solidity, because we have a cross compiler that compiles Solidity code to this WebAssembly target, as well as there's a project called Moonbeam that basically builds builds the Ethereum virtual machine as a deploys it on a parachain in Polkadot. Now, but you also have like chains that teams that optimize a chain, right? Optimize the state machine, the run main for one particular thing, such as for a DeFi platform. And one example there would be Akala, right? That said like, hey, you know, there are actually primitives, DeFi primitives that you would like to have embedded in the core layer of the platform and have them really optimized, right? To an extent that wouldn't be possible on a smart contract chain. Right, and those primitives can be the stable coins themselves. The primitives could be a DEX or other automated market maker or some other more lower level DeFi primitives that you would want to have in your platform, while at the same time having a smart contract module living on the chain that again allows third-party developers to extend the functionality that the overall platform exposes to its users. And the benefit that kind of this lower level access gives you beyond like a smart contract chain is optimization. And you see this optimization on one hand, obviously on transaction throughput, where you get in a parachain like at least 1,500 transactions per second today, right? In one of these charts, as well as by getting lower level access and designing the state machine for storage keys and so forth, the way storage works, the way the crypto curves work, allows you to build just better systems and give you more ability to innovate more powerful things. Whereas, like for example, on smart contract chain, you're obviously constrained by what Solidity allows you to do, what the Ethereum virtual machine, the state machine allows you to do, right? And the only areas where you get like better performance are those that those things that are baked into the Ethereum virtual machine and that are exposed via opcodes, right? As you may know. And those again are very limited, and usually things aren't being added because governance around it isn't optimized for it. So, and then if you think about the couple of protocols that went in this direction, projects you had like Polkadot, I think a couple of others went in the direction of allowing you to build your own chain, so to say, your own virtual machine, your own state machine, and have that secured. But Polkadot is the only one that said like, hey, it doesn't make sense to allow just somebody to enable somebody to build their own chain if they then have to build a community, a validator set, or the economic security to have that chain secured, right? Or even worse, having that chain being isolated and not being able to talk to all these other chains, particularly if it's a very single purpose blockchain, right? Because at the end of the day, the whole Web3 idea, the whole blockchain idea is that it is very composable, right? That if you build like a gaming application that needs some blockchain functionality, right? That needs blockchain functionality in the back end, that it can be plug and play with other applications, some other team building certain DeFi platforms that make your application or your system more attractive. And so that's really how I think Polkadot differentiates itself from all the others, by saying like, well, number one, you get extremely high degree of flexibility and autonomy and low-level access to build what you want to build and optimize for your use case, but at the same time not compromising security and not compromising composability by two things: being given the security by the Polkadot ecosystem, right? The relay chain and its proof of stake security weight that it has today, as well as providing this connectivity with all these other chains. Yeah, that's I think that's a quick rundown on Polkadot for those that weren't as familiar with it. Mm-hmm. And I think for anyone that requires expectation management within their application, right? So not just in the IPFS Filecoin world storage, but beyond that, some contracting capabilities, some expectation management capabilities I encourage you to check it out and see if that's relevant for you guys.
Thank you so much, Bjorn. I think that's definitely one to watch out for. Henry is actually here. Henry, would you
Hi,
like to come
everyone.
on now?
Great to see you
Yes.
all. Thanks for sharing. I'm Henry from Vera AI. So Vera AI builds verifiable trust for identity. So the main use case for Vera AI is enterprise background checks in recruiting and admission, and also social networking. And my main question is, what's your point of view on Phala network? Phala is a privacy-preserving competition network on Parity and Polkadot. And we'd love to hear your thought. My second question is, what's your point of view on the recent app called Clubhouse, which has been very popular in the US, and what's your point of view on their privacy characteristics? Thanks.
Hi, Henry. Thanks for the questions. Okay, let's start with Clubhouse. I'm not too familiar with Clubhouse, right? I've been on it once or twice. I suppose like it would be interesting to hear about their approach to data. I suspect it's probably just as bad as with most other Web2 platforms out there. Probably you don't own any of the data, any of your voice, any of your things that you conduct over there, which is obviously, from my point of view, absolutely fucking terrifying and terrible. I can see so many things how that could be exploited, right? Your voice, particularly as we go in the future and see how voice is even being used in some example as our means to authenticate ourselves, right? Think about all the social engineering hacks, how people take over your SIM cards, your bank accounts, or whatever. So I think I have generally some concerns around these platforms who you interact with, and you number one, right? Even in their terms and conditions, there is no there's no statement where they go forward and say, hey, we value your data privacy, say we won't do these kind of things. On the other hand, I obviously, coming from the Web3 perspective, I rather want to be in the world where I don't even have to put trust in these parties, that they value their commitment to not misusing the data that they are able to capture, but rather we have systems that prevents the parties that aren't involved in this interaction directly to capture that data. But like, please tell me, I would love to learn more about Clubhouse data privacy and approach to data in general.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so one issue I found is that the main appeal for Clubhouse initially was their exclusivity, because it's invite only and every member could only invite 2 folks. But now I've seen an influx of fake identities and fake accounts on the platform that really dilute the value for Clubhouse.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like you've seen that with many platforms, right? Often when they're bootstrapped, right, and like there's taking a big IMAG on getting high value contributors to the platform, that the platform is really attractive, and then over time, as there are not sufficient spam protection mechanisms or Sybil attack mechanisms, that the value proposition really goes down the drain. I don't know what I'm not familiar with what platform they seek to build eventually, right? Because like you can also have other examples like Reddit and so forth, right? That is almost seems to be intentionally designed in a way where it's not one human, one account, right? One identity, but rather lives from this anonymous nature, or pseudo-anonymous nature. So not too familiar. I haven't used enough to to make any kind of statement in with regard to how much I like it or liked it better before or after. Now with regard to Fala, right? I think they're an awesome team. Definitely worth checking out. And if you are coming from a perspective of like trying to figure out whether that is relevant for you as a team, as what you're building, then because like we're getting towards the end of that section, or we're kind of running over already, I want to just give you two things at hand. Number one is highly encourage, reach out to the team, right? Reach out to the Fala team, have a conversation with them. But above and beyond that, I always invite everyone, also everyone else on the call, reach out to us. There are numerous ways you can get in touch with my team or myself, right? My email myself is bjorn@parity.io. So like if you have anything, just reach out to me and I will get you to the right places in our organization or in our project, and you will be helped. But beyond that, you will also, we are a big proponent of Element and metrics as a communication, a federated communication protocol, and you will find, the Polkadot network and Substrate. Just go out there, write a message, hey, where you come from, whatever you are interested in, and we can make sure to give you some guidance and help you guys understand what's there, how potentially also Fala might fit into the picture, right? And help you guide through that experience.
That would be great.
But
Yeah,
for sure.
Very.
Please reach out, and
Okay.
I'll make sure to connect you with the right folks.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
We are kind of over time now, so I'd like to wrap it up. Thank you so much again, Bjorn, for all your insights and sharing today. And I hope everyone here, as well as listening to the recording, can benefit greatly from your sharing. Right before we go, shall we just take a quick group photo if everybody wants to switch on your video? All right. Hey, Mitchell, Junyao, yeah, like to come on.
Hi,
And
good to see you. Thanks for making the time.
all right, everybody say Web3. 1, 2, 3, Web3. Okay. Thanks, everyone.